Welcome to this discussion on ethics. My goodness, ethics is such an important issue today. As I speak to you now, there's a nominee for the Supreme Court of a famous North American country who is having to contend with accusations from someone who says that in an earlier life, 35, 36 years ago, this nominee conducted themselves inappropriately. And it seems to have become a sort of Damocles around this nominee's neck. Now, whether or not that nominee succeeds in getting appointed to the Supreme Court is something that's left for all of us to see. We are aware of the famous Enron collapse. In several African countries, there is story after story about issues attendant to unethical practices. In Europe, these stories also abound. In South America, these stories are also very prevalent. So what I want to do in this session is to start a vigorous discussion on this issue of business ethics. So what I'm going to discuss here will be an introduction to business ethics. I'll look at the origins of ethics. I'll also look at theories of ethics, ethics and business. I'll look at forms of unethical practices. I'll look at the price we pay for engaging in unethical practices, and then I'll look at the benefits that could accrue to a company that makes a strategic decision to behave ethically at strategic, operational, and tactical levels of the company. So I'm hoping at the end of this session that you'll be able to describe the origins of ethics, outline the theories of ethics, describe the different types of ethics, and then you can find a good way forward for your corporate entity. So what is ethics? Now, ethics refers to those standards or morals a person sets for him or herself regarding what is good and bad or what is right and wrong. So ethics can be defined as an individual's personal beliefs regarding what is right and wrong, good or bad. And there's a need for ethical behavior because when companies and individuals are sometimes left unregulated, there's no clear schemata they must follow in order to conduct themselves in ways that are not injurious, one, to themselves, two, to the companies they operate in, and three, to the societies in which those companies are embedded. So if we look at various professions, various organizations, various industries, the whole notion of code of ethics is now a very common feature. Doctors have a code of ethics. University academics have a code of ethics. Different professions have codes of ethics. The legal profession has codes of ethics. Now, established standards of right and wrong. That spell out what people should do and people should not do in a society. The rights they have, what benefit they should gain from being a member of society, are the kind of ideals that underpin the need for all of us to conduct ourselves in ethical manners. Now, once we all begin to subscribe to these high ethical standards, it ultimately prevents us from conducting ourselves in ways that would lead to us hurting one another. So, let's do a quick discussion on the origins of ethics. Now, ethics typically draw from religious doctrines, draw from law, science, and study of society. And ethics also draws on the power of authority. So let's look first of all at what we call deontological ethics. So this is one of the theories of ethics. Now, deontological ethics has to do with what we call Kant's deontology, which is guided by an individual's own sense of morality, what is right and wrong, and what is right or wrong to that individual. Now, so Kant's deontology, that's sometimes called deontological ethics, starts by acknowledging that actions and their outcomes are independent things. So basically, there are things you have to do even though you know they are wrong. So the problems with deontological ethics are concerned with how we know which acts are wrong and how we distinguish between a wrong act and what could be referred to as an omission. Theological ethics, on the other hand, have to do with arguments that border on what determines a good act is the outcome of that act. Therefore, if the outcome is good, then the act is deemed as good. Theological ethics distinguishes between the right and the good, with the right encompassing those actions which maximize the good. It's like the colloquial expression, the end justifies the means. Then we have what we call utilitarianism. Now, the utilitarianist, like the theologist, posits that outcomes are all that matter in determining what is good, and that the way in which a society achieves its ultimate good is through each person pursuing his or her own self-interest. So with utilitarianism, the philosophy states that the aggregation of all these self-interests will automatically lead to the maximum good for society at large. Then we have what we call ethical egoism. So with ethical egoism, the view is that all people look out for their self-interest. And in a certain way, it's very close to those who are involved with utilitarianism. It suggests that a person should act in a way that maximizes his or her own long-term interest. And it could easily be argued by some cynic that these people who do selfless deeds are actually pursuing their own aims. They look to make themselves famous by this act. So you don't do anything unless you are sure that you are going to benefit from it. Now, when you take this teleological thinking, we have an extreme form that we refer to as Machiavellianism. So if you are Machiavellian, what you do is that you do what you have to do to get the job done. And you could refer to that as expediency. So you are an expedient person. So this view denies the existence of morals if you are being Machiavellian. And the expedient view is that whatever you need to do to get the job done, do it. And so in times of war, sometimes in waging corporate battles, the argument is that you just need to do what you need to do to win, whatever it takes. And with people who are Machiavellian, sometimes they find it difficult to draw the line, because when you say do what is expedient, without thinking of the morality of the decision or the long-term consequences of the act you are going to commit, then sometimes what you do is that you sacrifice a certain sense of communal good, because in your estimation as an individual, you are doing what it takes to get the result. So there's a real danger in being too Machiavellian, because it is so easy to convince ourselves that, oh, what I'm doing is really fine. I mean, once I'm getting a result, I can just move on. And so people who should have stopped, thought about their actions, carefully weighed a certain set of alternatives before taking a decision that benefits not just them, but society at large, typically go with, wow, whatever I've got to do, I'll do it, and the end always justifies the means. Then another school in the whole theoretical salad of ethics is what we call virtue ethics. Now, with virtue ethics, there's an emphasis on an individual's moral character rather than their societal obligations or the consequences of acting or not acting. So if you're a virtue ethics person, you believe that people do good things because they have developed the virtues that lead them to do so. And virtues can include a wide range of attitudes and character traits, such as things like compassion, courage, honesty, loyalty, things like generosity. And all those things are character traits that could lead you to practice virtue ethics. Then we have what we call ethical relativism or objectivism. Now, relativism is the denial that there are certain universal truths or moral principles. And it's manifested in two ways. The first way is through what we call conventionalism. With conventionalism, the argument is that given a set of ethics or moral principles which define what moral behavior or ethical standards are, these things exist but not in absolute terms. But they exist according to the dictates of a given society at a given time, and they are only valid within a given culture or a particular time. That's what conventionalism is about. But when you take subjectivism, there, what you think of is everything is individual choice. So individual choice is the key determinant of the validity of moral principles. Now, the difficulty with conventionalism are twofold. First, ethical standards change over time within one society and vary from one society to the other. So you find that you can't use a common set of ethical principles to judge any two sets of people. And there are also different ethical codes belonging to different bodies, different professional institutions. So sometimes, if for instance, you're a doctor who goes to church and is also part of maybe a certain Rotarian organization, then between church ethics and the code of ethics of being a medical doctor or what you are being taught at the Rotary Club, you sometimes find it difficult to marry these and have a common set of principles that undergird what you do. Objectivism, on the other hand, is in direct opposition to ethical relativism and holds the view that although moral principles may differ between cultures, some moral principles have universal validity whether or not they are universally recognized. So, moral objectivism is the position that moral truths exist independently from opinion. And there are two variants of ethical objectivism, strong and weak. Strong objectivism holds the view that certain actions are intrinsically, universally, and unconditionally ethical. So strong ethical objectivism, or what we call absolutism, argues that there's one true moral system. Now, with weak ethical objectivism, on the other hand, there's a core morality of universally valid moral principles that are set an indeterminate area where relativism is accepted. So with all these theoretical discussions on ethics, we need to ask ourselves, why do ethics and business find themselves as very convenient bedfellows? Well, because business managers need to marry the pursuit of organizational objectives, pursuit of profit, pursuit of market share acquisition, pursuit of revenue generation, within the context of conducting themselves ethically. Because as far back as 1981, a study was conducted on business ethics, and it was found that in that particular study, 75% of responding managers have felt a conflict at one time or the other between the acquisition and pursuit of profit and the considerations of being ethical. I mean, that was as far back as 1961, not 1981. 40, 50, 60 years later, I don't think the narrative has changed too much, because there are several industries where females, for instance, are being pressured to compromise themselves sexually or morally in order to hit some deposit target or acquire a certain university grade and so on and so forth. So the story about being ethical and being ethical in business is not a new, it's an old story. And in 1977, another study was conducted that established the fact that a majority of managers in that study have also felt a pressure to be unethical at one point or the other. So what is business ethics? Business ethics just refers to the standard of conduct and rules based on moral principles governing how businesses and employees should conduct themselves. So it has a close link to things like social responsibility, a balance between what's right and what's profitable, and so on and so forth. Then when business ethics is really thriving, you can understand that it helps to bolster an organization's ethical climate. So, in the context of business ethics again, we can ask ourselves that, what are some of the commonest forms of the manifestations today of unethical practices? Well, one of the most obvious ones is companies who put out unwholesome products when they know the products have certain toxicity levels, for instance, that are unacceptable, or in some cases, the product has expired and they are still putting it out there. There are several types of illegal business practices. The whole issue of business and sexual favors, discrimination, unethical pricing practices, all these things come under the banner of unethical business practices. Now, when companies engage in unethical business practices, there's always a price to pay. Like, for instance, consumers can boycott your products and services when they perceive that you're conducting yourself in a manner that is totally unethical. You know the famous story of that international clothing line that starts with a letter I don't want to mention, that put out adverts recently with a boy of a certain color, of a certain dispensation. You are aware of the kind of routes that were created in Europe and Africa, how people boycotted their clothes. I mean, this company is now having to take away clothing from stores worth hundreds of millions of dollars because nobody is buying. And people kept on asking, who passed that advert with that young boy in it that sought to portray a particular race in a particularly negative light? So consumers can boycott your products and services when they perceive you to be conducting unethical practices. Loss of trust among customers, amongst employees. You can actually go bankrupt when these boycotts hit you so much. Sometimes when you make a mistake, like a particular car manufacturer had an issue with their brakes and how they are tampered with certain safety standards, they were hit with billions of dollars of fines. Major multinational company, recently the West African sub-region, was hit again with several hundreds of million dollars in fine because they had an issue with SIM cards and SIM card registrations. So there's a great price to pay for behaving unethically. But if you behave ethically, there are also benefits that accrue to you. Like, for instance, you can acquire a solid business reputation that can lead to enhanced consumer preferences, that can lead to more purchases of your products and services, that ultimately leads to a strengthened bottom line and ultimately to more profit. You can have increased trust amongst your stakeholders. Your employees will be committed to you. They will stay. Your employees will feel a source of pride with working with you. You gain societal acceptance. You garner positive word of mouth. So there are clear benefits of being ethical. And my recommendation to you will be that if you have not mainstreamed ethical practices into your business today, please listen to me. Any ethical organization ultimately enables its members to lead good lives in the real sense of the word. And when all is said and done, the organization becomes a major source of pride to work with. And you will succeed short-term, medium-term, and ultimately long-term. And let me just give you some advice before I wrap up. Listen, I've heard several people complain in industries like banking, law, the pharmaceutical sector. And they tell me, Prof. Science, listen, our colleagues who are being unethical have an edge of us because we are following rules, we are being regulated properly, and we are being punished. And I keep stressing to my colleagues who work in those sectors that my candid belief is that being ethical ultimately will pay off. So short term, those who are being illegal and unethical may seem to be winning, but medium to long term, I believe that ethical practices will always win the day. So my advocacy to you will be mainstream ethics into what you do, ensure there's strict compliance, and eventually the organization will come out the winner. Thank you for listening, and see you again soon.